Hola amigos and adventurers near and far. Welcome to Point Noir, home of the Point Noir podcast, where we not only inspire but equip men of color to go out and see the world for themselves. Je me llamo Jerry the Third, aka Kimono Jack, and this is the 51st session of the Point Noir podcast. I'm broadcasting this live from Madrid, España. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm out here courtesy of Passport Required, so if you're into adventuring for a low cost and just leaving no room for regrets in your carry-on, because that's all you can take on the trip, check them out at Passport Rec on Instagram. Shout out to Darnell for letting me lead this trip out here in Spain. We're having a great time. Yo, it's been almost a year that I've been broadcasting this show, sponsoring men of color to get their passports, hearing some of their return journeys, and it's been so dope. So shout out to all of you listening, rocking with me, just this crazy adventurer who started a damn podcast for no reason other than the fact that it sounded fun and I thought I could help some people out. Yo, it's about to be a year. Juneteenth is our pod-iversary, and I appreciate you all. So I'll have more news, some giveaways coming up as soon as I get back into the States. I want to share all those details with you, but just wanted to express my sincere thanks for y'all just listening, tuning in, sharing the stories, spreading the word about the passport giveaway. And if you're kind of feeling in that mood already, we are still looking for entrants for the month of June. So if you or someone you know fits the bill of being a man of color over the age of 21 that wants to see the world and doesn't want to pay for his passport, hit us up. In fact, you can even hit me at my email, kimonojack@gmail.com. I'm here to work with you. I'm here to help you out. So we'll do everything we can. Other than that, hit us up on IG at Point Noir Show. We have all the details. You can see previous entrants and previous winners there, get an idea of what we're looking for in terms of winners. We're really trying to get men of color to go out and see the world. So that all being said, we have another amazing guest for you today. I'm just going to warn you in advance, we had some technical difficulties, really like real talk, high key. The level of conversation that comes through in this show was just too much for the bandwidth at the time. So we had to do a couple of breaks in the session. So think of it this way. It'll be an opportunity for you to refill your refreshing beverage of choice. So I'll come back in. I'll let you know when it's the second part. And we're just going straight into the discussion. So this has been your fair courtesy warning. But promise me, if you stick with us through the session, you will get a ton of value out of it. Yo, our guest just threw it down in a way that we haven't even seen yet on the show, and y'all know we really get into the nitty-gritty. So I know y'all are gonna love it, I know y'all are gonna enjoy it, but while this Madrid breeze keeps blowing, I'm gonna cut things short, get to the chase, and introduce today's special guest. Joining us today as our special guest at The Point is Mr. José Guadalupe Adonis Gonzalés Rosales. You can find him on Instagram at José Bilingüe, and he's an adventurer, an outdoorsman, an educator, and just a wise man with some great perspective on life. You know, a lot of times we talk about adventure, we share travel tips, but today's session is so special because we really go in depth about some of that internal journey, that internal adventure that you need to take before you can change how you show up in different spaces, whether that be in your own state, in your own country, or halfway across the world. And Jose is a man who's studied, who's practiced, and who's modeled this. And he does such a great example of describing some of the steps he's taken and some suggestions for others. And I really appreciate him for spending the time and just doing such a good job at walking people through this process. You can tell he's an educator. So if that sounds like your cup of tea, listen, grab 2 cups, fill them both with your favorite refreshing beverage of choice, find the coziest corner of any soft surface at your nearest disposal, sit back and enjoy today's session. I'll see you on the flip side. Hey, what's going on, Jose? Thanks for joining us today at The Point. How you feeling today, fam?
Feeling pretty good. Pleasure to be here.
That's what's up, man. I'm so excited we could finally make this happen. Been following you for a while on Instagram, and you radiate such positivity, bro. Like it's literally contagious.
Thanks you. It's there's an intention behind it, you know, and when I also keep it real for people that it takes work.
Yeah, and you share a lot in languages that aren't English. I think Spanish. Am I getting that right? Sometimes my languages are off.
No, that's correct. Spanish as well.
I giggle to myself, but I don't understand what they say. But I know it's positive. I can feel that sort of energy. Like that's how strong you're radiating positivity, bro.
Love it.
Yeah, man. So let's talk about how you got into adventuring and travel. And I know you have a strong attachment to the outdoors. So I'd love to learn your story, man. How did you get into adventuring?
One of the things for me that's come around, like the sense of travel, sense of adventure, sense of wayfinding, I even call it, is so one of the things is because I was thinking about this, and so I'm an immigrant to the United States. So I was born in Mexico, and right before turning 9, my family migrated. We moved. So that's interesting because that's not the sense of travel for learning and recreation, the symptoms we associate, with like I'm going to travel to a certain location. This
Right.
was travel, but it was me now taking pieces of how I was born and grew up in Mexico and combining them with pieces of both. In some cases, it was similar, but also incredibly different way of living and lifestyle in the United States. And so that was I think about that as my first inadvertent and unknowing sense of adventure, because it's not like something I
Hmm.
signed up per se, but it was an adventure. That was me beginning to pay attention to how do I move into spaces and arrive at spaces where there is difference to engage with and where I may also represent that difference in a space. The way that this connected with kind of like nature and the outdoors has been that as a kid in Mexico, the outdoors was just outside. It's a small rural town. So that sense of adventure was go out and explore, go out and play. And coming to the US, that changed a little bit because now we were kind of in a suburbia urban environment. So it wasn't just go outside and play. If we wanted to go out to the outdoors, usually we'd have to drive there or make it a day event. We would go with the family
Right.
to the river or whatnot. How that has stuck out with me was my first introduction to kind of these quote unquote natural protected spaces like a state park or a national park. And the adventure came from wondering, exploring. I have a lot of different frameworks in terms of how I approach something new, but it was this like wow factor. Like I had never seen sequoias, which are majestic, huge trees that my mind was just trying to grapple with how these existed. Yeah, and then the last piece is to the sense of adventure to now that nature to me is in the outdoors is a reminder of kind of this at minimum a duality. It's so comfortable and familiar. If you look for it, if you pay attention to it, because we as humans grew up with it, we evolved with it, it's a component of us, and the work has really been about how we've detached ourselves from it. But it
Right.
carries a sense of home and connection, and at the same time, the adventure component is that it also provides just enough out there, just enough otherness, just enough what's around the bend kind of thing that it engages a sense of adventure, of exploration, and wanting to be like, cool. So, what's over there? And it goes back to our roots of, when we first quote unquote came down from the trees and we wanted those spaces that had enough sense of exploration. Like I want to know what's over there, and I still want to be close enough to my tree or whatever it is to run up for safety if need be. So like that's the kind of stuff that nature provides to me.
Yeah, I love the way that you phrase it. I really appreciate it. Something that kind of ignites that innate curiosity inside of all of us. I don't think I've ever thought of it that way, but I think you're 100% right.
And it's a heck of a teacher.
Yes, yes, it, definitely one of the ultimate teachers, and it's served as that since we've been able to record these events and how we interact with nature. So back me up a little bit. Were you always into outside and outdoors when you were a kid, especially during that transition coming into the United States? Was that a place where you saw commonality between Mexico and wherever your family moved to in the States?
Yeah, it's a great question. It goes, yes. The short answer is yes, in the sense that the part of playing adventure without me thinking too much about it in Mexico was it just was a part of it. Even if I was walking to school, it would be walking along the river that ran through the town.
Right.
And so coming to the US, the commonalities, what was comfortable and familiar about it was that the natural environment was not radically different. Even though, yes, it's not the same trees, even though, yes, it's not exactly the same landscape, it's not as if it was, it's not as if I was taken from an Arctic tundra and then dropped into a tropical rainforest. where,
Right.
was jarring enough to be like, I really have no sense of how to navigate or be in this space. The difference was that understanding our relation to space, if I can use that term, was different. Like I said,
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't surrounded by as much openness, if that, I would say the word in Spanish, el monte, like the hills, weren't just there. Now you had these reminders that city parks were like in grids. If we wanted kind of more spread out lines and boundaries, we could go out to a regional park. And even then, there was a clear sense of do this, don't do that.
Hmm.
And again, this is not to paint some idea that in Mexico there was no rules or like it was just do whatever you want. It was more, I think, about kind of the cultural framework of your relationship to the space. To me, was a lot more noticeable and stricter. And it hinted at that separation of like, go out to nature and then you come back home rather than that follows you wherever you go. And so I wasn't as aware of it as a kid as I then later reflected back, especially in college. But I was being able to notice and see it. And that to me always kind of carried this sense of otherness.
Hmm. Yeah, you bring up a really interesting point. And like I told you before we got on the show is really free flowing, but I'd like to add to what you shared to that
Hmm.
because to me, there's a different cultural relationship, like you mentioned, but I think it's one of almost dominion versus one of harmony when
Yeah.
I think about Mexico or other regions where culturally or historically, there's always been a harmonious balance, at least a sense of respect where we live with the earth. This is a part of us. This is a part of our heritage. It's important, has value. Whereas I think in the States, especially in urban centers, it becomes like, okay, no, we own this, we contain this, we're going to provide the boundaries and shape nature. When ultimately the reality is nature shapes us. Like we don't beat global warming or like we don't win the planet. Eventually the planet always wins.
Oh yeah, exactly. There's very much on board with that. There those little expressions come. Even I visited my grandfather a couple years ago back in the hometown. He hunts, and it's not purely for sport. It's both kind of just a bit of the subsistence kind of hunting, a little bit of kind of just also recreation. I asked him, so is it just as easy as before? Has anything changed? And he would say, well, before there was more of these type of wild pigs that he would kind of go after. And he said, now there's less. And he said, part of the cultural change that has happened has been that now people just go for the fun of it and don't care. And I
Mm,
asked them, like, where do you think that's come from? There's different expressions in Spanish sometimes that we say del norte, like from the north. And
yeah.
it's the way in which, like you said, right, the cultural framing begins to change a lot of times of our relationships with the space. And I think you nailed it. There's always communities that have a relationship with nature that, we don't want to romanticize a sense of balance or harmony. That doesn't mean that isn't utilitarian. We do use nature. We have that utilitarian connection with it. And what's important though is that it still comes with a sense of reciprocity. And that's what my grandfather was trying to tell me. It's like,
Mm,
don't take more than you need. Don't be wasteful about it. It isn't saying we're not going to use it, but it's also being that reciprocity is important because once we shift into the sense of dominion, and this is the larger conversation around colonizing, right? That's what kind of how you begin to see some of those impacts.
right, right. So you mentioned reciprocity, Jose, and it reminded me, I completely agree with it, but it reminded me of a word you used earlier, duality. And I personally struggle with that word. I think it kind of creates some hard lines that make people
Mhm.
sometimes make bad decisions because they kind of feel forced on one side or the other. I think in terms more of systems or even symbiotic relationships where it's
Mhm.
okay for something to feed off another as long as it's being fed in return. Can you share some more about that? And I promise everyone we'll get back to adventure, but this is such an opportunity.
No, for sure. And all of this can be connected to adventure because I think the way in which we better understand ourselves and our relation to that around us, that informs, I think, the way that we can have a sense of responsible adventure, right? That doesn't perpetuate harmful systems.
Hmm.
Um, one of the things that I'm hearing you say around duality is the way that it can be limited to binary thinking, like that there's
Right.
it's either or, right? And it
Mm-hmm.
misses the and component. And this is fundamental work usually when we even talk about like equity and inclusion work, which is how do we ensure that the words that we use, the phrasing that we use, the intentionality that we use has the and component, that it's additive, that's expansive, rather than the or but.
Hmm.
Because then that creates those hard lines that you're kind of mentioning, right? As if it's interesting how at times we support and want to push non-binary engagement and understanding in spectrum type of thinking, right? For example, when we talk about like gender and sexuality as one example, without thinking about it, we can fall trap to binary thinking. But it has to be this way
Right.
or that way, without looking at, like you said, well, what kind of effect could this type of choice and decision making have in a way that you could realistically end up with two truths. And it's not a question of which one's more right and which one's more wrong, but acknowledging what's the relationship, the correlation, that causality between that choice and consequence. What I was getting as one example, when we're talking about how it's expanded my thinking, was when I, as an immigrant to this country, one of the phrases in Spanish, ni de aquí ni de allá, which was kind of pervasive, was as you grow up in the US, there's this phrase or feeling of like, well, you're now less Mexican.
Mm.
Um, you're going to go back to Mexico, but you're now more American. But then being here in the US, you're not American enough. That sense of like, well, now you don't fit in either one. That I first had to overcome that piece to kind of think about how I am now from both. It's additive component. And you begin to unpack it because a lot of our current American culture really screws us over in binary thinking. Like, learn English, right? Or this is America, speak only English. And I'm like, well, why can't you speak English and Spanish? How are we limiting ourselves to have that and component? So I went from then having this sense of, say, well, you're bicultural, right? That you have two cultures. For me to say, well, how about if I think about that as being ambicultural, just like you're ambidextrous, to say, well, I can kind of use both, leverage both of them as important, useful components of me, to multicultural and so forth, to now I think about quantum identity. And by quantum, I mean the sense of that you can embody all these possible states of you. It's the multitude of you. And what's going to happen is it will collapse into a specific facet of your identity depending on your engagement, like who you're talking to. This helps me process code switching, for example, right? So now suddenly I'm going to be more Chicano with somebody else. I'm going to be, or I might be more academic with somebody else. I might be more nerdy with someone else. I might be more casual, but it's still all the pieces of me. It's just that quantum state of identity has collapsed.
And per my understanding of quantum mechanics at the level that, I can understand it again, it's all about observation. It's what's going on in the moment of observation. So it
Right.
leaves boundless possibilities, really.
I like how you phrase that. I'm to support kind of us having a working conceptual definition of quantum mechanics, right? To not have people feel like, well, I need to be able to understand that to kind of like get what you're saying. What it
Yeah.
basically states, right? What it states is that once we get down to a certain level of reality, which is small, below the Planck scale, things don't work the way that they work in our daily lives.
Right.
Um, it is governed essentially by this idea that there is a multitude of probabilities. It's not about what's possible or impossible. Many things are. It's just going to be what's going to be most probable to happen. And until it can be every possibility within that. And so that's where
Hmm.
the observation and engagement comes in, where once you make the observation, you've kind of like forced the particle, you've forced the wave, you force the piece of reality to be what it is. It's kind of like you're showing a light on it, and that's what you captured. But prior to that, if it was everything it could possibly be. That's the whole thing about is the cat dead or alive, and like, well, it's both until you look.
100%. And to back that up, because we went deep and I love it, quantum mechanics deals with how physics change. You know, you probably took physics in high school, maybe in college, probably in high school. But, you know, the simple mechanics of throwing a ball, those rules don't apply once you get past the subatomic level. Is that correct, Jose?
That's correct. Yeah.
And if you wanted to add to your research, the cat analogy that he was talking about is a famous experiment done by a scientist named Schrodinger, and it's called the Schrodinger's cat, where they would essentially put a cat in a box, and pretty much their thoughts determine whether or not, with a poisonous gas, and their thoughts would
Yeah.
determine whether or not that cat was dead or alive. Essentially, according to quantum physics, it was both until you observed it, and then you got your answer. We have started with some strong coffee today, bro. I love it.
Yes, we have. Welcome to the way that we sometimes interpret the world.
That's one of the reasons why I'm so grateful that men of color with perspective like yourself do answer my DMs, because this should be shared. You share so much depth on your IG, and I definitely with the people you interact with, but there would be no way for me to know that all of this perspective, additional perspective, was here. I just had an idea, and then we are 15 minutes into the show, and here we are introducing people to elementary quantum mechanics.
I think it's a good perspective.
Hell yeah, and no one's mentioned it like that yet, but I love that you related it to identity, because I know you do a lot of work around inclusion, gender, race. All these things are important, and I've felt kind of that struggle of culture identity. Where do you fit in on the spectrum? And sometimes you feel too white to be around black people or too black to be around white people. And I think it's something that adventurers, especially men of color, have to contend with mostly when they're at home, after they've gone out and seen the world and people don't accept them as the same person that they were when they left. And I'm curious to know how you have kind of navigated these challenges or opportunities, as you probably see them as, throughout your life, from a little boy of 9 just immigrating to the United States all the way to the man you've become today.
Yeah, what a great question. Yeah, there's so many pieces in there. I'll try to like touch on some of these that I have found they've been important to me, and that I think that they can offer some reflection and learning to others. So there's a component of just being a man of color, right? Which at minimum incorporates your gender and sexual orientation in terms of what does it mean to be a man, period. In our way to continue to grow and hold
Mm,
on to what I consider kind of the divine masculine energy. I think that's probably people misunderstand. Like nobody's saying don't be a man or don't understand what it means to be a man. Around the work around toxic masculinity, for example, is saying, are we clear enough in being responsible about what that means, so that you're grounded in the truth of that identity without it being harmful to others, and especially to set up a harmful impact on women and
mm,
others, but also on other men. So that's the first thing that comes into play, because so much of that identity has been dominated by essentially a white male type of framing, um, and to be the quote unquote of color component has its own pieces, right? Because then we look at what gets to decide what does positive masculinity look like as a man, but also as a man of color? And how are we supporting ourselves with that? How are we enriching our relationships to kind of say, this is what it can also be, rather than this is what you feel you're losing, this is what you feel you can't be, but rather this is actually what it can gift you and others. And when you travel, it allows the opportunity, if you do it with the right intention, to add to that expanded view and perspective of the world, so that you can be a role model to others in the way that they may not understand, because they may not have that opportunity to travel in the way that you do. Right? You've kind of become that portal or that ambassador, whatever the word is, a vision of what is possible if they also have that opportunity, or if they don't have that opportunity to know, like, wow, like that's how it could be. And to give you one simple example, if I may, right?
please.
As I've understood my role as a man of color, navigating in the world and traveling to other places, is three pieces. One is, how does the space around me, for example, other people, how do they see me? And why does that matter? In some ways, it doesn't matter, because what really should matter is how I see myself, right? And how I represent that. And it does matter in the way that I have an opportunity to positively push and support their perspective on what a man of color can be. Especially when we know that through shadeism and colorism, uh, being a black man specifically, you're given way less opportunities to mess up, essentially. Right?
Hmm.
The default is that you are something to be corrected. Um, and so that's important, because then I have responsibility to that. And the other component is that now I get to incorporate and think about what additional perspectives I think I can come to show my fellow men of color that, hey, this is okay. There are some things we can let go of that are no longer useful. Uh,
Right.
for me, growing up as Mexican, it's the whole idea of machismo, right? It's part of the culture, but I can say it doesn't have to be. Let's look at that. Why does that exist? And how do I ensure I don't continue to perpetuate that or reflect that? And that can be as simple as me painting my nails. And it's a fantastic kind of self reflection piece, because I was just telling a group, so when I paint my nails, what that means is just that I have my nails painted. That's it. It says nothing
Right.
about my gender and sexual orientation, because I'm a hetero cisgender male. I've never had to confront or reflect or think about the fact that my orientation is different. I know who I am, and I'm grounded in that, and I'm comfortable with that, and that's never been a question to me. But it is fascinating to see how some other individuals, what it does, how they react to that, and then I can think about that as a conversation that we can have.
Sometimes people wanting to keep you in that box is more reflection of them
Mm.
than of you. And I definitely commend you for having that sense of mind, putting in that personal work. I don't know how you grew up or what your household was like, but in my experience, it's been a lot of work to kind of shed these ideas that don't serve you.
Oh yes, very much so. It is a lot of work. I could have been a very different person and a very different man, if I had allowed purely what I grew up with to shape that.
Kimono Jack here, checking in again, and this is the beginning of your official beverage break. So while you are refilling that glass or that cup, listen, if you have a passport and you're looking for dope stuff to do, there's going to be no better place to be in the world than Paris, France, with me in October as I lead a 5-day Bites and Sights trip through the city of light, literally the city where I learned to be a tour guide. I cannot wait to show you all the hidden spots, the off-the-cut places where I know you're going to get a ton of experience and a ton of exposure. It's not only the culture, but the true city of Paris. So check out journeytoparis.com if that sounds like you, because we have over half of our spots taken already. Might have to book a whole nother set of accommodations. So definitely want to hop on it quickly. And since you're a loyal listener of the show right now, if you mention that you heard about this offer through the Point Noir podcast, you're going to get $50 off the total price of your trip, just because I appreciate you all so much. So definitely check out journeytoparis.com, and by now I hope you have refilled your refreshing beverage of choice and are ready to settle into the second half of today's session. Can't wait to see you on the other flip side.
Navigate in a car, in a vehicle, those tend to be the spaces, I think, where something about it that ego is wants to be the most present. It's like, and I think that's probably what leads to a lot of incidents of road rage, which is like, actually, that's basically letting ego run amok. But I think, like, with travel is in itself a practice of reflection on ego. Because if you approach travel with an idea and intention that I am visiting a space, I'm a guest
Yeah.
in another location, another area, then one of the better ways to be in relation to this idea, into this space, is by putting ego in its place as much as possible, right? So you can reflect and learn that it's not centered about you. Because if it is, then you're taking up space in a role, an area that you should be there as a guest. And think about what that looks as an invitation rather than an imposition of your needs, ideas, and requirements. It doesn't mean don't care for yourself. It doesn't mean don't think about your own needs and kind of boundaries. It's just like here you are the one with an ability and privilege to travel. Will ego drive that experience such that it's me, 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 me? And I want the space to conform specifically to just me? Or am I opening up myself to the experience to say, what does this give me? What does this teach me? It doesn't mean you can't have fun. People think that we we have to approach travel as like some type of full of compassion, non-humorous, serious monks or something. What's the word? I guess
like a fucking pilgrimage.
exactly. I'm like, that's not what it is. This is what I loved about my spiritual development work, is how you can still, it's you. Congratulations, human, okay? None of us are ascendant masters. You're not Jesus, you're not Buddha, you're not Muhammad, you're not any of these individuals who kind of were here to play that role. You still carry divinity though within you. And to me, that's a great reminder about like, you can, let ego be where it needs to be. Ego's never going away. It's always there and it'll play a role. But travel, almost like driving, I guess, it's a good test to kind of be able to say, how am I entering space as a practice and reflect my ego?
I completely understand where you're at with that. I think I'm kind of obligated because of hosting the show and part of the conversation to help lead others into it, because you're not talking about a surface level definition of ego. How am I appearing in space? When you say space, a lot of people think in the physical,
Right.
body space, proximity, that sort of stuff. But I think a different way that occurred to me when you shared it was, how transparent am I allowing myself to be in the space? What am I allowing to penetrate what I think of as me or myself?
Mm.
Because some people don't like the service. Well, that has nothing to do with the space. You're in the restaurant and you're eating the food, but you feel disrespected because staff isn't waiting on your every whim and care, or you feel offended because someone spoke to you in a different language. But how much are you letting your visitation penetrate your levels of ego? Because you'll realize how many layers you have once you get
Mm.
in these unfamiliar spaces. It's the layers, that level of transparency. Are you opaque when you travel, or are you as see-through as you can allow yourself to be?
Oh, so well put. We can learn something from cells, right? That those are semi-permeable membranes. So
Yes.
you still have a choice to be selective about what goes in or out, but it is a process of, as people say, osmosis, right? But also just diffusion is really what
Mm.
it is about. Like you said, if you're kind of, there's a way in which you can be opaque, like you said, right? You can be like, it's important for me to have boundaries and this is how solid they are, like a wall, but then you're not really receiving. And worst is if you're pushing, being destructive, a tank roaming in space
Almost like a kidney
rather
stone.
than kind of being,
You are you, but in this space, it's
yeah,
not cool.
yeah. Congratulations, kidney stone.
What was that last part you said?
No, I was just thinking, like you said, congratulations, you're a kidney stone.
Right, we might have to cop that for the show. We might need to get some bandanas. Don't be a kidney stone, men of color.
I can see as one of your guidelines or points when you say like, here's 5 things to remember to travel, and then one of them is like, oh, and don't be a kidney stone. Nobody likes kidney stones.
Nobody. I love it. That's culture right there. Let's jump back,
Yeah,
man. I actually ended up hitting the recording button because I was like, this is so much gold. I'll deal with the editing later.
great.
So I want to know how you were able, what experiences led you to be able to see a separation from the man you wanted to be or the man you could be and your ego, through travel.
So there's the way in which we think about travel as quote unquote the exciting, the exotic, the far away, right?
Right.
And I say quote unquote because again, I'm there's things to unpack there, and I don't want to be dismissive, but I also don't want to be generalizing at the same time. Uh, what I'm trying to say that is the sense of like, let's travel to another country, right? Or let's go to some new location that's very new and different for me. And that's important for many, many things and reasons. And I want to also kind of remind people who may be limited in that opportunity, right? They're like, I can't take a vacation every year, or I can't travel to a lot of places that I would like to yet. I think it is doable. I think that should be encouraged. I think there's ways to do that with a lot more awareness and responsibility. I say that because travel can also be that which you do within your own home state, right?
Mm.
It can be that which you do within your home country. It can be, there's a lot of ways in which you can travel within that. And that was my initial traveling experience before I was able to visit any other country. It was to be able to look at what does travel look like from my home space, where I grew up, the town, leaving to go to college, for example. That's a
Yeah.
sense of travel because it was a new culture. It was a new way of understanding the world and reality and whatnot. And that's what began to unpack it for me. For example, I didn't have a gay friend until college. I wasn't in a space where strong, positive women leaders were guiding uh, our organizing work until college.
Yeah.
I didn't have any black friends growing up either. I didn't have a strong idea of chicanismo, like what it means to be a Latino male in relation with other Latino males, where we weren't minimizing each other
Mm.
until college. So that was one of those first expansions. And to me, it was gratitude because it's not yeah, I went to go to college and now I could drink whenever and I could like party and I could be free from my parents. Like it wasn't that. Mine was just, it was different from that. And then that opened it up so that during college, actually, I also had the opportunity to participate in a program where I traveled throughout California for work in outdoor education. And
Okay.
that was an opening piece for me to begin to look at, wow, this is really exciting to be in a new area that I otherwise wouldn't be. It also, I faced spaces which were discriminatory, in which I wasn't comfortable. You know, one time I walked in with my friends in this rural foothill town. And as soon as we came in, it's like the music stopped and people were looking at us with this look of like, what are you doing here? This is not
Mm.
for you. And we left. And one of my peers, she started crying because she's like, oh my God, I know that feeling. Those were all pieces that helped inform my idea of like, who do I want to be? How can I be different? And what does that mean in how I want to share that with others and with those around me?
So, were there any moments away from home, I'll say, that really imprinted that idea where you said, you know what, I have no other choice but to figure out another way around the situation? You know, while you were journeying, adventuring, seeing new things, did you have any moments that stand out as just striking in that way?
Yeah. Yeah, one time for graduate school, I went to the University of Michigan. So my friends and I decided that we would road trip across the U.S. Um, to get to our respective graduate schools. I ended up in Michigan. Another friend ended up at Yale. Another friend ended up at Duke. And I remember that because there were moments within that, right, where we intentionally said, let's go to places that we wouldn't otherwise end up.
Hmm.
Um, you know, like one time we we ended up in North Dakota right before Sturgis was happening. So just like we're surrounded by bikers,
Yeah.
so much of the space, which was fascinating. But I remember specifically too, that was my first time that I went to Grand Teton National. And I was so excited because I'd heard about it and it's stunning. Naturally, it's majestic. It's interesting to know that I now have had the opportunity to return to that space a couple of times. But the first time was not a positive one. I went into a small store and just, I forget the town now nearby. And I wanted ice cream because I saw a sign that said ice cream. And I went in and I got that same look from one of the attendants, kind of like, oh, you don't belong here. And it was very odd because I came in with such a sense of I'm really looking forward to all of this. I'm so excited. And how easily that type of interaction could it othered me. But what does it mean to other somebody else and why?
Yeah.
And that stuck as a reminder to what do I do now? Because it's not a question of if, but when. When we're going to make mistakes, when we're going to mess up, right? When we're going to screw it up and know, well, that was not representative or reflective of who I wanted to be. Or I just had no clue. I did not
Right.
know it would have this type of impact. But that was a clear example that just reminded me of this practice that we can have. And then it can definitely come through travel of othering and belonging. And what does it mean to other in the way that it negatively impacts? What does it mean to receive other as a gift? How to engage with difference? And what does belonging mean? What are the spaces in which you create spaces of belonging that you feel you belong? And also, it can include spaces where there are some spaces not yet meant for you. So it's okay not to belong.
Mm.
Maybe it'll happen, maybe it won't, but you have to be intentional on how you get there rather than just presuming I should belong no matter where. Because that's kind of like saying, I'm a white dude, so wherever I go, I should belong there. That space should conform to me. And that's kind of what's gotten us into trouble a lot of the time.
Wow. That's 100% right on. And could you do me a favor and break down othering and belonging? Because I know you
Mhm.
have definitions that are more complete than my own. Some of this language and verbiage is new to me. I've been
Mm.
actually, we were introduced through Kiona, How Not to
Yeah.
Travel Like a Basic Bitch. So always gonna rep her and shout her out. But I
Yeah.
learned so much from
Agreed.
that page, and a lot of it is new words, new vocabulary. And I'd love to know a little bit more about the word othering and belonging.
Yeah. So first, yes to Kiona. I mean, just oof. I hope people understand the amount of work that she puts into her work. Period. In her own learning and growing through that, while also just remaining authentic as hell. Just
Yeah,
facts.
100.
Yeah.
She's such a great human, like point blank.
Yeah. Human goals right there. Um, so the othering and belonging, to me, this is important because I don't frame or bill myself as an equity and inclusion consultant or diversity, equity, inclusion consultant, for example. I do that work, but and what I really think about is the language is going to continue to evolve and shift, right? For several years ago, we were a lot more focused in talking about diversity. We've now been able to incorporate the themes of equity and inclusion, justice oriented work. We're talking about things like decolonizing, for example. And I frame all of that to try to create a structure so it can still hold the space for my ideas. Sometimes I tell people, like, these are the fundamentals for me. And so that falls into the work of othering and belonging. And I say this so that it can encompass the evolutionary wiring that we have, which comes from the fact that we are social creatures, right? We're social animals. We evolved to draw comfort, familiarity, and strength from those that are like us, that are similar. This the whole idea of original tribes, right? You had a
Right.
group that you leaned on for survival and protection, and there were other groups that you didn't know or didn't necessarily could trust or lean on, or sometimes you fought each other for it. So that's there. And we're also in a much more integrated kind of social fabric nowadays. So we're embodying these wiring, evolutionary wiring in modern spaces where sometimes that comes into conflict. It's
Right.
like something like caveman wiring, but capitalist consumerist colonizing abundance.
Hmm.
So here we are. And so that's what makes the work of othering and belonging crucial to me, because if we don't pay attention to that, it's easy to perpetuate the systems that are programmed in fight or flight mode. And they can be a lot more harmful now than they used to be. They still hurt, they've always hurt. There's a difference in knowing that back in the day, you either made it or didn't, and then your survival things were gonna guide you of let me find food, let me like take care of whatever. But now you're doing that on a daily basis in a way that you may be responsible for hiring somebody, right? You may be responsible if someone gets promoted. You may be responsible if you say, I want to have a business or whatever it might be. And that can be happening on a daily basis. So what to me is acknowledging that difference exists, and that difference in itself can be good and valuable. And also it comes with the responsibility of how you value difference in a way that's good versus how you perpetuate difference in a way that's negative. The belonging component is that we all have this craving, this need, this wanting for spaces in which we feel ourselves, we are ourselves, we can feel comfortable. That's what culture is. It's what's comfortable and familiar. We all crave some aspect of that. And because that difference also exists, there is a way to be responsible in the diffusion of this ways of knowing, ways of being, ways of doing, of culture with each other, so that you know that you have to be respectful of what that difference can be. So a clear example of that is like cultural appropriation, or you thinking that certain indigenous practices in ceremony or whatever, are there for your enjoyment consumptions, and you forget about the fact that those have deeper meanings for a community. So you can't just go into that space and be like, hey, can I take pictures of you, or can I buy that from you, or like, hey, tell me about your costume, and be like, whoa, like, step back.
Right.
No, and that's regalia. That is not a costume.
100%. And thank you so much for sharing more depth on that. I know it's a lot of words, and to anyone listening, I encourage you to rewind that twice,
Yeah.
because with the platforms and the technology, I love how you mentioned the caveman wiring with the, consumerism of the day. Technology has outpaced our ability to rewire our brains. It's just been so rapid, the advancement. But we have this ability to create platforms for free with the internet and get mass exposure. And one thing I'm very aware about as being a owner of my own platform and someone who watches others, especially in the Black travel space, is people of color who are actually acting in the ways of, let's say, former oppressors, who don't have the level of education or understanding around some of these more subtle principles, where they're actually it essentially means they're doing the same thing that was done to them.
Yep. Yeah.
Black people appropriating culture. And one example is when I all the guests, I used to have an Instagram group, it still exists, but I used to call it the Point Noir tribe. And then it was getting education from Kiona and others around her circle, where I was like, okay, I can't call this tribe anymore. Like, that's not cool.
Right.
We need more of that education to be spread and dispersed, because we have the ability to influence so many more people on an individual basis than we ever have before. And we want to promote positive culture, positive advances for all of us.
Agreed. Yeah, that's on point. You also just said a lot, so listeners can rewind that as well.
This is going to be a dense podcast. It's going to be quantum dense. I love it. It's as dense as you make it. But you bring up some really good points, and I can already tell for the ease that you speak about these things that you have spent a lot of time studying. I'm curious, how did you get to learn all this? How did you first become interested in getting to know people and understand differences to this point? What was that impactful moment for you? Or you were just always like this?
Oh, no, great question. You just said something that just, there's a smile on my face, because I was just sharing a story. And this is actually grounded how part of my practice evolved here was teaching. So in this case, I was a 10th grade history teacher, and I was showing my students samples of my essays from community college to kind of say, like, hey, let me show you what my work was, and what the professor gave me feedback when it was an A and when it was not an A. And one student in the back was just raised their hand, and I'm like, yeah, what's up? And they're like, did you always sound like that? I was just like, oh, tell me more, right? Like, what do you mean? What a great question. Help me understand it. And they're like, you sound smart, and you sound different, and you da-da-da. And we unpack that, because it was a good reminder of what I had. Was the point I was trying to get to them was, well, first of all, you're smart regardless of how you sound, I said.
Mm.
Second, this is what this means is just it's academic language support. I said, and that's a tool, that's a skill development. This is not how I grew up, right? I didn't pop out into the world like knowing all of this. I had to make intentional and conscious choices about what to focus on, what to develop, what to grow. It's kind of like the expression, what you focus on grows.
Yeah.
Whatever you're steward in the garden, that's gonna be there. And you also, and it's patience, because you don't get to sit under the shade of the tree you just planted, right? You don't get to enjoy the fruit of the tree that's just growing. Um, and so I'll come back to that because it's still a powerful reminder to me about why it was important for me to support academic language development, especially for Black and Brown students, because then they get to college without that support and they're put in remedial courses, and it feeds all the stereotypes and and stuff around being dumb, feeling dumb, like you're not worthy, that you don't belong there, and all that stuff. I said, no, the system just didn't support you to like show you here's a key that's given to everybody else except for you,
Yeah.
right? Um, but that was one of the fundamental pieces that helped me do this, was teaching. As an undergrad, I went into a teacher training program. A key thing that provided me was, when you're in the classroom, you have a duty and responsibility to do your best to reach every student. You don't get to select and say, well, I'm only going to focus on the most that need or risk student and whatnot because they need it the most. You can, but then you're like, what am I doing to then help shape the thinking of the most privileged students?
Right.
And you also can't be like, well, the most privileged students are the easiest because, I can I can just focus on them and forget about the students that need the most help differently. Because if I do that, then I get to perpetuate the system about who gets most in trouble and why, and who gets to kind of be shepherded into the school to prison pipeline.
Yeah.
So that was a constant reminder to also show my students how I had to embody the role of student as much. A teacher meant it didn't mean I knew everything, that you either did it my way or there was no other way. I always had to know everything. That I always had to hold the ultimate hand in a power struggle. So that was important to model to them. And that meant being open and transparent at times and being vulnerable. Everything from like, you know what, I don't know. That's a great question. Let's see if we can find out. To, yeah, I struggle just as much as you with these things, right? Um, so that began some of the unpacking and the learning for me about this, how to approach life, how to approach the outdoors, how to approach travel, how to approach being in relation to others as a learning, um, as a view of the world. And it's easy to say and it's practiced. It really, really is. Um, and then the other component later on was, you know, going through personal relationships that thrived and then failed was another good reminder of being like, okay, you can do all of this work in this space and make some progress. And here's all the other spaces in which you're going to continue to do work so that it continues to be reflective of who you want to be. And then after that, I push deeper in my spiritual development to be, I don't need to believe in the God or necessarily even a God in a specific way to understand a role and responsibility and embodying more than physical presence in this
Mm.
world. Um, I can definitely, and I support individuals that I think have a relationship with God that allows for us to be better. I just wanted to continue to expand that in my own growth. So that's kind of that's a long way of kind of just saying that I chose to learn. I chose to acknowledge I was gonna, mess up, and that this is the proverbial journey. Not There isn't a destination you reach and say, "Yay, I'm woke! Yay, I'm enlightened!
Right.
Yay!" and so forth and so forth.
And that sort of response, I think, ultimately shows that you might not be as woke as you think, because it comes with responsibility, it comes with accountability, it comes with a degree of burden that you're willing to shoulder in all instances.
Yeah.
Yeah, sunlight makes plants grow. It also hurts if you look straight at it. So
Oh yeah.
be careful out there, y'all woke people. Um, but dude, I love that. I definitely felt it when you said, relationships being another teacher to show you, okay, I might have all this in the bag when it comes to my occupation or my passion or, my fitness, but how I engage with others on a level that has deep meaning, and those, for me, interpersonal relationships has always been a revealing opportunity, and it's made me a better person when I deal with, more acquaintances and friends and new people.
Hmm.
So as a teacher, I'm curious to know, not even as a teacher, in terms of your development, do you have any books, maybe one or two books that you can think of as being significant to your growth and development to this point? I think that would be hella interesting and valuable to share.
Hmm. Yeah, so well put. I tend to have a stack of books that sometimes I carry with me, and I always struggle when people tell me, "What's your favorite book?" I'm like, well, see, I have favorites, but it's always hard for me to pick one. And I just say that so that that people know. Don't Here's five that I'm currently engaging in reading, and don't feel like, well, just read these five, then you're good to go.
Right.
Um, two that I'm been finishing up now are Braiding Sweetgrass and Emergent Strategy. So
Okay.
Emergent Strategy is by Adrienne Marine Brown, excuse me, and Braiding Sweetgrass by Dr. Robin Wilkemer. Um, and those have been helpful to kind of put into framing and language a lot of the ideas that I've been, for example, sharing right now, a lot of the ideas that I had and was wondering how others were thinking about it. Um, so there's those pieces. The other one is there's a book called Other Ways of Knowing, and it's by oh, shoot, I can't remember the name. I'll have to send it over. But that provided a really great perspective about understanding the role of quote unquote modern Western science and how it frames some concepts for us,
Hmm.
and how it's not good if we limit ourselves purely to that. It is important because it affords us a lot of things. This is when people think that science is bad. Like, no, 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 actually, science is incredibly important. And it's when we don't do it well, that's actually what gets us in trouble.
Right.
And it's a fascinating way to look at how other cultures, other communities throughout the world have understandings of time, of space, of relationship with others that is just as powerful and complementary to a Western view of science.
Hmm.
And sometimes it's just another way of viewing it. And it is a science of its own because science just means knowing, right? It just means what is knowledge.
Right.
Yeah. So there's those are three. Along with, I have a few other ones that are kind of for meditation practice, and also that are purely for kind of like thinking about the outdoor environmental and conservation work as well.
So let me phrase this question because I feel like you either do this actively or you've definitely done this. What is your favorite book to gift people? Your favorite two
Ooh.
books?
Oh, that is so good. All right, so when I think about that as gifting, there is a book that is called Drink Cultura, and it's about Chicanismo. And I love that book because it was my introduction to understanding some of these concepts, right? Of what is it being a Chicano is. And it was an introduction. It wasn't the end all be all. But it helped me just when I read it, I began to see myself reflected, like those experiences when you read something like, it's me. Like
Yeah.
I'm part of this story. Frankly, to be honest, it's the modern Black Panther phenomenon, right? When you're like, oh snap, here's here's a story that's like for me, about me. I mean, not really because I'm not Black Panther, but it's like it's also different, right? It's
Yeah.
not the same old narrative. So that's that's the kind of reaction that I had with that one. The other book is The Four Agreements,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
So the Four Agreements was one of my early introductions to thinking, well, about agreements, period. in one of the basis of my spiritual work, as well as the role of education that I had at that time, and just begin to unpack some of the relationships with indigenous knowledge and presence. And then back in the day, I also used to gift the book Ishmael, which is about the conversation with a gorilla. I don't want to give too much about it, but and it began to kind of unpack this idea of roots of human culture and history,
Hmm.
and what got us, what are like the 2 to 3 main cultures that exist in the world, and how did those come from, like, original story. So
Wow.
I know it's a little harder to. I'm trying to not explain too much about it, because I think it's the kind of book you have to read and then either be like, whoa. There was like one of the book jacket phrases was like, I divide all my books into 2 categories: those before Ishmael and those after. And I was like, oh, come on. And then I read, I was like, all right, I see why.
Right. Right.
And then you're always gonna have people like, well, this is BS. But I'm like, well, as with most things, it's what you choose to receive from it.
Yeah. Wow. I will definitely, we're going to talk to get all those titles down. They're going to go into the description, and I want to put them on the outro, because the beauty, besides having the opportunity to talk and just share this experience with you, is that when you're thinking at this level, when you become more conscientious of yourself and the spaces around you, that's really when you start to make moves through the world. Because like you mentioned earlier, travel and adventure isn't just limited to going to a foreign exotic location. You could go down the street and that's adventure, but it's
Mm,
how you perceive it, and it's really how you show up.
yeah.
Because there's this idea, I love the phrase, not all who wander are lost, because
Yep.
I've traveled around the world and a lot of people are lost, and they think that changing their physical location will remedy whatever is making them uncomfortable inside. But you
Oh
bring you
yeah.
with you everywhere. So if you're not working on you, if you're not thinking about you, don't expect anything to change.
Mm-hmm. So well put. I think, 2 pieces that always come to mind me there is like, sometimes one of the most transformative adventures or radical adventures you can have is that going within yourself, and then being like, whoa, okay, here's some terrain, here's a location I had never went into. And then the other one is, yeah, it's this idea that purely being in a new location in it by itself creates change. It's kind of like being in relationships and thinking, oh, I'm going to change something, or
Hmm.
something's going to change just by being in a new place. We have to say, well, no, you, as much as you'd like to, your role, and frankly, your also ability, is that you can't change somebody else. They have to be willing to change themselves. What you can do is support an environment, or support as much as a supportive environment as you can to facilitate that change for them, but there's
Hmm.
will have to be the ones to do it.
100%, 100%. And these are discussions, similar discussions I have literally on a monthly basis. We give away passports every single month. And I
Mm,
just got off the phone with a former colleague of mine, and her little brother doesn't want to travel. Her current, dude that she's with doesn't want to travel. And she's like, Jerry, what do I say to get the
mm,
men to travel? I try to introduce them to the podcast. I try to tell them about this. I said, listen, all you can do is facilitate a positive environment and try not to shame them into doing anything. Just be positive, be there. And if it happens, it happens. But that's all you have control over.
yeah. And like you reminded me, even in teaching practice, you used to say, it's important to move beyond models of telling and punishing, into models of modeling and practice.
Mm,
And even like you said, to encourage especially men of color to travel, is to have them see and understand and reflect into the idea of what makes them a better man. Because I would argue that few men say, I want to know how to be a worse man. I want to be, I want to learn how to be more trash. Um, and sometimes I tell people, like, one of the most powerful things is to name things.
yeah.
And sometimes we don't name them. Like, we have behaviors, but then once you say, like, actually put a name to the behavior you're doing and see what happens, right? And that, because I do that to myself sometimes. I was like, oh, damn, like, yeah. So what I actually said there was, hey, Can I be more arrogant here, please? I was like, damn it.
Right.
So
It's that's a really powerful tool. And yeah, bro, you're right. Most people aren't walking around saying, how can I be more trash in my life? How can I be more useless to you and myself? And thank you. I'll take 5 of
yeah,
those, please.
yeah, yes, please.
And we won't even get into the compounding impact
But
of habits, when you don't challenge what you do.
ooh,
This is amazing, dude. This
oh
is
yeah.
such a great exchange. And since you're in the travel space and the outdoor space, I want to talk about what you've seen in your experiences. And in my view, there aren't many men of color who travel. And I talk to a
Mm,
lot of women of color who travel, ones who are curious about it, and they'll ask me, you know, I'm worried about traveling, being out in the world by myself. And I tell, yo, sis, there are more Black women of color traveling solo than men of color
mhm,
traveling, period.
mm.
And I want to know what your experience has been of either facilitating or encouraging men of color to travel or just to get outdoors and be in nature. And what are some of the common roadblocks you've experienced?
Yeah, good question. I would say, I agree with you. I think of all the different reasons why it's a different, ways, more difficult and challenging for men of color to travel. One of them is, I almost want to say, is because there's different levels of incarceration, right?
Mm,
There's the physical incarceration, just like black men, for example, and men of color at large tend to be removed from this. They're incarcerated. They're The idea of black joy is constantly under threat, um, and the incarceration can be also self in the way of you thinking you might have a narrow or narrowly defined view of what your role is as a caregiver, protector, whatever it may be. And then also the culture that supports you, right? And what gets as affirmed as something that brings value to your identity.
mm,
And so for me, I've looked at the ways in which I still have to be able to quote unquote practice what you preach, right? That's the model and practice component. I want to be able to encourage, facilitate, and in the best sense of the word, enable others um, to follow a path that I can't promise is going to be safe, because safety is important, but it isn't a guarantee I can make to everybody. What I can say is we can have productive struggle, we can learn from it, and then we can try to support each other through it. Um, I remember the second time that I hiked Half Dome in Yosemite. And I had been just so excited about the first time. I went with friends. What a tremendous learning opportunity. And I was sharing this with a couple of my male friends, all Latinx, and they were excited. They wanted to go too. And then I was trying to tell them, okay, so listen, it's a lot of fun, and it's also really hard. And like I was trying to download the information, right? And I realized, there was those three pieces again, right? I could not be responsible for all of their struggle. Yeah, I also could be responsible ensuring that at minimum, in terms of safety, I could bring the things that I knew we were going to need. And that also I couldn't be responsible for promising a specific type of experience for them.
mm,
I can only say, this is what it was for me, and this is how I think you can access it as well. So I say this because with one specific individual, his ego was a little bit too much in the way, and he wasn't as prepared as he could have been. He had the kind of shoes that I told him, like, look, this is sometimes my role is purely to provide information. And I was told him, like, those shoes, you're, you might be harming your feet with those shoes.
yeah,
And at on the way back, like, I don't think those shoes are gonna be able to support you, da da da. And he's like, no, I can do this, da da da. And so whatever. I'm like, okay. I had the things I needed to make sure that if he physically hurt himself, we were gonna be fine. But I could not be the one to basically tell them these are all the steps you should take. And
right,
sure enough, his shoes fell apart on the way back, and he was suffering, and it was painful. And my job was not to say I told you so, right? Because that's just ego poking ego. And but it was important for me then ask questions like, hey, so would you do this again? And if no, why not, right? So I can unpack that. uh, and then also, and so what would you do differently, right? So I could support that learning space, and he would return, and he did kind of have a moment to be like, you know what, yeah, this is I made a mistake with these shoes. And so that to me is what's the exciting piece, to kind of encourage people to not shame them, like you say, to not create these spaces of blame that because we don't know, everybody's going through their own struggles and we don't know what that fight is for them, but we can provide spaces to change and reflect, right? To be able to say, like, we all fuck up, like we all, no, sorry, you might have to beat that out, right? We
No,
all,
no, I should have mentioned it
yeah,
earlier. You can say whatever you
okay.
want.
Oh, that's right. Hey, no FCC, whatever. No, the that's important, because damn, like, it's already hard enough to be human in this world. It's already hard enough to be um, disempowered in many different ways. And while women of color still need the most, some of the most critical support, and receive some of the most systematic oppression, as men of color, we don't make it easy on ourselves at times. And I think that's
Mm.
important to look at the ways in which we can support each other through that.
100%. And you nailed it. It's not the place to shame or criticize. And I think we are around similar wavelengths. For myself, you say model and practice. I'm very critical of myself. My self-judgment, self-talk game is getting better every day, but it can be
Mm-hmm.
really intense. And sometimes that's how I respond to the people around me, just in general. It's my demeanor. But
Mm-hmm.
every moment of reminding them of a previous version of themselves prevents me from growing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's an important thing that I've kind of taken on to, hey, we don't need to talk about the old you who thought this was a good idea. Let's talk about the new you and how you only make good decisions around this point from now on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's what Adrienne Marine Brown has in her books. Like, if the lesson is that we mess up and make mistakes, well, then we're kind of wasting our time. So we already know that's going to happen.
Yeah.
I want to know what happens differently.
Yeah. 100%, man. Dude, this has been a heck of an experience. We're going to have to find some way to continue this sort of narrative, this sort of conversation, because not only is it completely different for the show, but this is some of that inner work that I believe that travel can sometimes give you a window into. And then when you come back home, you're just like, okay, now what did I bring back with me? I need to unpack this. I need to understand, my current experience, because something shifted, something changed. So having words, having vocabulary, having frameworks to put this through, I think is really going to serve people. So I'm so grateful that we had this opportunity to have this exchange, man.
Same, man, same. I'm grateful for this opportunity and hope that anyone listening out there, again, takes this as it takes it from work, and no pretentious. The arrogant. I always, reflect on the arrogance of expertise,
Mm,
and so mindful of that. And ultimately, I hope that conversations like these can be of service.
100%, man. And yeah, I definitely think they will be. I will be listening back to this, not only for edits, for enjoyment. So I appreciate it, man. And before we round out, I want to know about all the positive things you have going on, and also where people can get a hold of you and keep up with your activities. What do you have going on in your world, Jose?
Yeah, great question. So, I have current work is involved in kind of outdoor science world, and the outdoor industry world, in the conservation environment movement space, and in the nature movement space. So I'm grateful for that. I say that because, you might see some of my work pop up in terms of presentations or workshops and stuff that I do. What I'm working on now is to support and elevate a lot of my creative endeavors and projects now. Begin the writing of a book, do some illustration work. So you're going to be able to follow most of that on my social media channels. Specifically, Instagram is at Jose Bilingüe. You can find me on Twitter and Facebook under the same. The other thing is, I'm really proud of the foundational work that we did with Latino Outdoors, which is some of the founder and director emeritus of that organization. So
Oh, wow.
go check them out on Instagram, sharing them mutual love. Yeah. And what I'm really looking for in terms of projects is I have two goals. One is get those creative projects on my end done. I put them on hold for like at least 2 to 3 years. And so I want to do those. And the other one is how do so here's the thing, right? I'm working off this idea of lessons from nature in how we can be in better relations with each other, and how something like fire is essential to some healthy natural ecosystems. Some we do need to let go of some stuff. Some stuff does need to burn away. It does provide the space for healthier growth. And some trees, some species have adapted to growing with fire as part of the equation. So we can't be afraid or face fire with fear. And when we have conversations of like, let's burn all this shit down, right? Like burn it all and start over. I said, well, we have to be mindful of how strong of and a destructive of a fire are we doing so that we actually do screw up the ecosystem. how much are we driven by emotions that we can be very there's very valid reasons for them in terms of what drives our reactions to injustice, because injustice exists, period. There are systems of oppression. We do have to deal with toxic masculinity and colonization and so forth. And like you said before, how much work are we doing to ensure we're not perpetuating those systems on ourselves? We're not taking the tools of the oppressors on ourselves. As Kiona said, are we changing the systems or just changing the color of it? And that's what I'm focused and interested on now. What are the agreements that we have with each other? How do we navigate with, not just through, but with conflict in relation to each other? Because that's real and that's happening now. And so we can either burn it all up and burn ourselves with it, or we can be, as a lot of indigenous communities, demonstrated, we can also be responsible fire stewards, and that can have a lot of impact. And you can follow my Instagram for some deep thoughts, for some memes, for some poetry, for a bunch of other stuff. So that's kind of where my focus is at the moment.
Yeah, it's all there in abundance. It's all positive. It'll definitely bring a smile to your day. And again, I mean, we kind of come full circle from where we started the discussion talking about the challenges of how duality is often interpreted. But the answer is more than likely both and. And I think even just having that little bit of flexibility, developing that flexibility in thought will allow people to see strides not only in their personal lives, but in their travels. We can have two apparently conflicting things going on at the same time and everything's going to be okay.
Exactly. Happiness and sadness are not mutually exclusive for you to have an awesome day.
Well, and sometimes you cry when you laugh. So yeah. Dude, this has been so great. This has literally been a joy, been a treat, man. I can't wait till the next time you join us here at The Point. Best of success with all your endeavors. We'll definitely be shouting you out and following along to see what's going on. But until next time, man, travel safely, take care of yourself, and we'll see you next time.
See you next time. Thanks so much, Jerry.
All right. Peace. Yo, Jose dropped a whole freaking sermon on this session for no reason. Like, when I reach out to people, I really don't have any sort of preconceived notions or intention. This is just where our conversations went naturally, organically, and I'm so glad we had it recorded. And thank you all so much for hanging in there, because I know it was a lot, but yo, the value was so high. This is definitely one of my favorite sessions ever. So thank you so much, Jose. And because I definitely had to practice your name on the first half, got to do it again on the back half, as I always do. Ladies and gentlemen, again, that was Jose Guadalupe Adonis Gonzalés Rosales. Thank you so much, bro. I cannot wait until we meet up and hopefully in real life and chat again, because it was so dope. Maybe we do something like this live. I don't know. Tell me how y'all feel about it. Anyway, yo, thanks for tuning in again, session 51. I'm live out here in Madrid. And listen, one of the cool things about having a kind of mobile platform like I do is I can record anyway, but the wind started picking up, Madrid started acting funny, birds started chirping. Wanted to get you guys a good recording, good clean recording. So I'm down in the basement of my hostel right now recording this for you all, but I really appreciate the support, appreciate every single listen, every single comment, every single story reply that you guys send out to the account. Like, it's just super dope to have this impact, and I will definitely share some more about the process when we have our podiversary tomorrow. So Madrid's been dope. If you heard about the Paris trip during the break, Journey to Paris is definitely the place to check out, and Madrid has been lovely, y'all. Like, I might have to do a trip out to Madrid just because it's a vibe. It is a whole vibe out here. So if that interests you as well, definitely let me know, man. I'll put it together. I'd be happy to lead you all through it, kimono and all. And I'd be happy to travel out in the world with some more adventurers, people who are ready to gain perspective, not just passport stamps, So that all being said, please travel safely, adventure well, have fun. I'll see you here soon at the Point Noir podcast. This is Jerry the Third, aka Kimono Jack, signing off.